Hi, this is Rob Nelson with tappingthematrix.com, and today I'd like to explain a little bit about how EFT or tapping actually works. So one thing to understand is that there's a particular part of the brain called the amygdala, and the amygdala, its job is to decide whether something is a threat or not. And if that something is determined to be a threat, the amygdala then triggers our body to go into the fight or flight response. All of our resources are mobilized to deal with it, and what we get is a whole lot of stress and the ability to take action. Now, here's the thing. The part of the brain where the amygdala is centered is called the limbic system. And the limbic system is a very old part of the brain. It's sometimes called the mammalian brain because we share that part of the brain with other mammals. It actually predates our frontal cortex, our executive functioning, by a couple million years. It's very old. So what does that mean? Why is that relevant? Well, our spoken language, our ability to use words to convey meaning, is a much, much newer innovation. It's a newer part of the brain, and the limbic system is much older than that. And what this means is that spoken language does not really register with the amygdala. You can't just talk to the amygdala and tell it to calm down. It's like if you were talking to a combat veteran and say, hey, relax, the war's over, you could just calm down now. You could say that, but it isn't probably going to do a lot of good. So where tapping comes in is when we tap, we're sending a signal directly to the amygdala saying, it's okay, stand down. And we use spoken language to actually bring up the distress, and then we pair that with the tapping. It basically just tells the amygdala, you don't have to be worried about this particular stimulus anymore. And it usually works immediately. That's why the results with EFT can be so stunningly fast. And there's another part to this that I think is really interesting. Think about, did you ever learn to ride a bicycle? If you did learn to ride a bicycle, you probably know on a visceral level that even if you hadn't ridden that bike for maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 years, it doesn't matter. You can get right back on the bike and know how to ride. That's because the knowledge of how to ride a bicycle is stored in what we call procedural memory. Procedural memory is where you've developed a skill, say, and the brain needs to keep it current for you. The knowledge of knowing how to ride a bike is just kept fully present. Well, the same thing happens with any kind of emotional trauma. When we go into the freeze response, when fight or flight isn't working, the amygdala will trigger the freeze response. Any sort of memory like that, whether it's a big deal trauma or something really small, is stored away as procedural memory. And what that means is it's kept current in the brain. It's as if it never really stops happening. And that's a big deal because stimuli from the environment can trigger the memory. If a Vietnam vet was walking down the street and he happened to smell some peculiar Vietnamese spice cooking at a restaurant around the corner, it could actually trigger a stored trauma, and he might experience a full-on flashback. We all experience this phenomenon to hopefully a lesser degree constantly. Things that are stored away as very important because they came at such a emotional cost are kept current in the brain and triggered constantly. This is why people with very severe anxiety disorders, they'll slip right into fight or flight. They'll go into a panic attack without really even realizing what stimulus triggered them, because there's too many stimulus. So what EFT is doing is essentially we're relocating specific memories out of procedural memory. So they no longer are current. They're not a current event that keeps happening over and over and over in our brain. All the resources that go into keeping a memory in that procedural state, are freed up then, and we get more and more vitality back. But even more importantly, we're no longer triggered. The memory isn't as relevant to our survival according to the brain. So that's another level that EFT is working on. If you have never experienced tapping, it's really pretty amazing. Some intense emotion maybe you've been carrying around for 20, 30 years can just suddenly be gone. I encourage you to try it out. It's fantastic stuff. Okay, thanks. I hope that explanation helps a little bit. And yeah, this is Rob Nelson with Tapping the Matrix. Take good care.